Very much, Austin. Looking at, examining this resurgence of interest in vintage or classic, or in some cases just old music production hardware. And, over the last few decades, we've seen this kind of becoming more and more high profile, and the number of items achieving this kind of cult appeal, and Austin will be looking at one of these in more detail, the Teletronics LA2A. But rather than get stuck right into specific items of gear, I wanted to try and see that what factors are important from the point of view of the producer. What do they seek in an item of equipment that could potentially lead to becoming a classic? And we've seen, a lot of companies such as Roland, who are kind of releasing recreations or machines that are inspired by some of these vintage or classic pieces of hardware. Obviously, their 808 there, which recently had its anniversary, and the TR8 reissue or recreation. But then there's other companies who are actually creating complete reissues of these old school pieces of hardware. So companies like University of releasing the UI compressor, Korg have released things like their MS-20 reissue, which is a component by component clone of the original. So much so it actually comes with the original 70s manual for it as well. A couple of little extra features added in. But and in parallel with this, we've seen software manufacturers who are trying to recreate many of the characteristics of these kind of classic machines and sort of trade off the appeal of this retro hardware and attempting to model the behavior of these kind of classic devices with varying degrees of success. But you can see just from this screenshot alone the endless variations on quite a small number of classic hardware compressor units in this case, like the LA2A and the 1176 that you already mentioned. But viewed over the course of the kind of historical development of music technology, it's only a very small number of these devices that actually achieve this kind of classic status. If you think about all the also-rans that nobody has ever heard of compared to these kind of very high-profile devices. So what is it about these that particularly makes them so appealing or achieve this cult or classic status? So I'm interested in exploring those sort of factors. And yes, indeed, we see some straight clones of these machines as well. The Behringer Model D clone there, and various clones or reissues of other hardware compressors as well. So, in order to try and find out, what these devices have in common, I took the approach of initially looking at a variety of print and online sources that mention classic hardware in some way. And these range from things like reviews or interviews with producers to tutorials that describe the behaviors of some of these machines. I took these from a wide variety of sources. Some of these listed here, things like Tape-Op magazine, Sound on Sound, Pat magazine, and you have various blogs and forums too, things like the Gear Sluts forum, and extensive discussions of many classic items on there of varying quality, some of the discussions. But, in addition, I kind of thought it was important to acknowledge the software influence as well. So I also looked at what software manufacturers are reissuing and what the, again, reviews and interviews with producers, what features were identified as being important in those machines, or in these kind of software versions of the hardware machines as well. And from this documentary analysis, I found some factors that were repeatedly mentioned. So things like the feature set of the machine. Was it small, limited number of features, or could it do a lot of different things? Reliability was something that actually came up a lot, and particularly in interviews with producers, that this machine could be relied on to still be working when they went back to it. And again, anyone that's used sort of classic or vintage pieces of hardware knows that is not always a given. It's like the Roland Space Echo, for example, it has achieved classic status, but I know a number of people who have them, and at least 1 in 10 times you switch it on, fire comes out of the back, and you've got a 200 quid repair bill and coming to you. The character of the devices. Again, this is the kind of sonic character. What's the secret sauce that this device adds to the audio being processed, or the composition and production process. And as a kind of correlate to that, transparency, some devices are prized because they don't colour the sound as well. Again, is this something significant? The interface, so the actual hands-on controls, or in some cases, I guess, the lack of those as well. And their significance, and the styling of the machines. Again, this is something that is quite often mentioned in reviews or accounts of various devices, is the look of it. Does it look cool, I guess? And something else that I was interested in, that wasn't really mentioned all that explicitly in many of the articles, but I wanted to see if it was a factor or not, is the kind of exclusivity, and that these machines were in many cases made many decades ago and are no longer available as new anyway, the kind of clones and so on aside. But it's something that is important to a producer as well, you know, that they are one of the very limited number of people who might have access to this particular tool or this particular device. So from taking these factors, I sent a survey out to a number of music industry professionals working in the domain of sound engineering and music production, all of whom had over at least 20 years of experience, and some of them over 30 years of experience working in the field. And this survey was a mixed design which incorporated quantitative and qualitative responses. So they were asked to rate the importance of the features that I previously identified, but they were also given the opportunity to add either features or factors that they thought were important, and to comment on the various factors there as well. And this is what I found. Now I'll talk about each of these factors in a bit of detail and hopefully illustrate why these are important or of lesser importance with some of the comments that the survey respondents made as well. So features were sort of seen to be of medium importance. We can see here reliability and character really dominate in terms of significance to the user. Transparency, perhaps less so. Interface again. Styling, kind of in the middle there. And then exclusivity, you can see that people seem to actively reject the notion of exclusivity, that they felt that this was perhaps not a desirable characteristic at all. So to look at these each in a little bit more detail, the feature set of the devices was of intermediate importance, but people seem to be kind of on the fence a bit. They really preferred, or from what I can tell from their responses, devices that were quite niche or quite specific, the right tool for the job, rather than the Swiss Army knife approach, or something that can kind of handle all different tasks that would be thrown at it. And one of the, some of the kind of feedback that we got there is most well-made kit is pretty flexible. It can be turned to lots of different things. Again, compressors like the 1176, something I saw there is that its use case scenarios are listed right away across, the entire instrument set. Whereas there was other devices which were known to be good for drums specifically or for bass specifically, but this seemed to be something that was more generally applicable. And again, things like there are very few classics that are all things to all men, so there's a little bit of the user's perspective in there as well. But something that came out as being quite significant, or a preference of many of the producers, was they actually preferred more limited feature sets in these devices, that they felt that maybe these allowed them to focus on the task at hand a bit more, rather than having endless options or many menus, that a limited number of features allowed them to achieve sort of a higher result more quickly. We had some feedback there. I quickly realised that you have to turn these limitations into advantages. The lack of extensive features makes the whole thing much more speedy to work with. People expressed a rejection of things like endless menus or encoders and knobs that behaviours change depending on what page of the menu you're on and so on. One knob per function is quite strongly preferred. I like a lot of the older designs, older style compressors, where they're almost less flexible. They have more specific sound and character. Simple control sets seem to make it easier to make the right decisions. So this kind of speed of working was quite an important thing there as well. So I think with many designers would be tempted to jam in lots and lots of different features to appeal to more people, but perhaps actually limiting the feature set is something that ultimately is more appealing. Reliability was actually the most important factor to the users. They didn't provide an awful lot of specific information relating to this. I guess it's not sexy to have something that's reliable, but at the end of the day, if you're working in a professional environment, you need to know that your tool is going to work over and over again. You don't want it to necessarily be like the exploding space echo. But things like reliability in terms of sound quality and longevity, and will this still be working in 40 years? Again, if you're spending this kind of money that some of these classic devices now command, but I'm pretty sure you want to protect your investment and know that that is still going to be doing what you bought it to do in many years to come. The sonic character and transparency, and these are almost like opposite ends of the spectrum here. Something that adds character and colours the sound in a particular way that is musically useful. Transparency allows you to sculpt the sound without it being audible that you've done something to it. And overall, people seem to prefer devices that had character rather than devices that were transparent. I did look a little bit at preferences for hardware and software, and some of the feedback we had was that software was better for the tasks that required that sort of transparency. The software allowed the user to go to places that the hardware perhaps couldn't, and vice versa as well. But for these kind of coloration tasks, the hardware was preferred. And again, we have some kind of responses there, having a unique colour which benefits the audio. There was a tape op talking about the LM76 and the LA2A, that they achieved dynamic control of recognisable sonic signatures that have become classic sounds in the realm of record making. So some of these devices have a familiarity to the sound that has also made them become classic. They're used time and time again. We can look at things like the Lexicon PCM70 reverb, which has this very characteristic sort of snare drum sound that sounds like a record, is how people talk about it a lot of the time. As sort of a sub-factor that's come up a lot as part of this sonic character is the question of musicality. This is a word that's often used to describe how these devices colour the sound, that they colour it in a musical way as compared to a device that maybe hasn't achieved that classic status. This is something that's a little bit subjective. I didn't really manage to find a nice, accurate definition or explanation of what constitutes a musical coloration. It's certainly to do with harmonic distortion and so on. But there's a nice quote here from one of Chord's designers of some of their classic, or modern classics, let's say. He's told initially that circuits were functional, but they're not musical. Musical instruments need perfect waveforms and correct operating points, and need to use the transistor for what it is. As long as it sounds good, it's okay. And again, this is sort of a fairly common theme that the device can perhaps not have a great amount of features and so on, but if it sounds good, if it has that special sauce, that voodoo, if you like, then it's something that makes it into the producer's kit list. The interface was something that respondents rated as being of medium importance, and again, we've got some nice quotes or bits of feedback from the producer survey there as well. That hardware processing is unique, tactile, fun and inspiring. I like to have the hands-on feel of the hardware, and I hate menu diving, so if all the knobs and sliders have one function, that suits me. The interface itself puts some sort of, or gives the user some affordances, and again can put potentially creative limitations onto the user as well. This is something that Simon Zagorski-Thomas noted in his book, that very often the change in the way of physically performing a particular task makes more of a difference to the sound of the musical output than the sound of the new technology. So if you have a device that has very powerful sound processing capabilities, but those are hidden away behind menus or multiple function knobs, perhaps you might not be as inclined to reach out and interact with the sound in that way as compared to another device which everything is explicitly laid out in the front panel or laid out in a way that encourages musical interaction or sonic interaction with it. Something that was mentioned a fair bit as well was the kind of familiarity factor. So it's something to do with the interface, that these devices would all perform in a predictable way. You reach out, you touch the ratio knob, and that's going to be fairly consistent across these different things. And this is something that particularly came up, I think, in looking at software, that the software interface was familiar to users with hardware, and again, that allowed them to achieve the results that they were after much more quickly. Styling, again, something that comes up a lot when you're reading sort of reviews or accounts of these kind of classic pieces of equipment, and survey respondents rated as being of intermediate importance, but they didn't really comment on it all that much. It was only explicitly mentioned by one respondent in the survey, is talking about the look of the device as being something that was a factor in its appeal to that particular user. But certainly, I think the way that something looks is potentially a selling point. But again, you could look at something like the LA2A, which is not a particularly lovely looking beast in its sort of original format, arguably. But nonetheless, that has achieved this kind of classic status. And then looking at exclusivity, and this is, as I said, something that participants seem to actually reject as being of any importance. They almost all rated it the lowest rating. I also asked, how accessible do you feel that music production, classic music production hardware is to the music producer? And people make these sort of points that the cost of it has risen over recent years in ways similar to vintage instruments or fine wines and so on, and that these devices were unaffordable for all but the kind of most successful professionals. But this, I've always found an interesting point as well, that due to the modern workflow, a producer can get a lot more use from a single piece of hardware than they maybe could in the past, where if you had one compressor, well, it can compress one thing, but with digital multi-tracking, you can run many things back through that one compressor and track them back into the DAW. So then there was a number of other factors when I asked producers to list other things that were important to them about or that they looked for in classic hardware. Depreciation was and again, it's linked to the reliability. Will the device hold its resale value? So if you make a significant investment into one of these classic pieces of hardware, and you change your workflow or fall on hard times or whatever it may be, and that you can get at least some of that investment back again. And something that we see with digital devices is that they frequently don't hold that value. That as digital technology keeps evolving, and those devices become obsolete. Repeatability, does the unit produce the same results with similar input and settings? So again, this is to do, I guess, a little bit with reliability. Is it consistent in its performance? Popularity, is this an industry standard piece that a client would expect the producer to have access to, or that a producer entering the studio would expect to find there as well? And again, that may relate a little bit to familiarity, and also factors like the heritage of the devices as well. And then also, workflow. Does this device improve or streamline the production process in some way? Does it answer a need that the producer has for a particular type of processor or sound-generating device? Most respondents also highlighted the significance of either the heritage of the device, so that it comes from a well-known manufacturer, has this kind of legacy behind it, but also its association with classic music productions or well-regarded productions or artists, has been used in Abbey Road or on tour with Sabbath. These can all add to that kind of cult or classic appeal of particular items that we see them kind of mentioned again and again in connection with these sort of famous names or famous productions. This is a word that almost everybody mentioned at some point across lots and lots of different contexts: quality. So that the device was seen as being of a very high standard across the board, and I thought this summed it up: quality both in build and sonically. So this word came up across almost every single one of those features that I listed there at the start, that I identified, that we would talk about the kind of high quality of these devices. Something that was also important to producers was the ability of this device to solve a particular problem or a niche application that they might have. So that it benefited very specific applications. It doesn't do anything like other bits of kit don't do, or it doesn't do it better. And so this was something that could also lead somebody to purchase or be interested in purchasing one of these classic devices that filled a gap in their workflow process. And I thought this was kind of a nice summation of really the appeal of the classic hardware as well, or kind of a sort of meta appeal. Buying into a classic brand or design affords customer confidence, particularly with products in which the quality may be subjective, as in how does the colour the same, is that something that you like or dislike, and frequently that sort of an end user or a listener may not realise exactly what that device has brought to the party, which is something that's very important to the producers. So, thank you very much, and take any questions if anyone has. Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. I think another term you should consider is misappropriation as well, because I think quite often the meaning gets lost with some of these iconic pieces of equipment. So, to give you a real world example, Fairchild. I used to use the Fairchild all the time when I was mixing, but the meaning of the Fairchild for me was, so it was designed as a compressor, but it was a really lousy compressor. It was a colour box, okay? So when I see my students now plug it, what they're looking for, they have an expectation, this needle has to move. I never wanted to see the needle move. So I think some of these technologies, the meaning gets lost in terms of how we now, the expectation we have from someone. So I think possibly another thing I would think about in your research is how meaning of these changes over time as well, misappropriation.
So when you say misappropriation, are you referring to, say, creative misuse of the device?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in that case, it's not compressing, it's just colouring.
Yeah, it's just colouring, and I know Austin's going to present, I still have an LA2A as well, it's 70 this one, and for me, quite often there won't be any gain reduction. I'll just use it as a colour box. Yeah. So I think sometimes that gets lost in, so we look at a plugin and we see a VU meter and we have an expectation that we need to be hitting this meter, but actually quite often that wasn't the point.
Absolutely, well, that's something again in the literature you can sort of see documented very well. I think with Thomas talks a bit about that too, that creative misuse of these devices is frequently more interesting than what they're intended for in the first place. But yeah, it's I'll definitely consider including that. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
I've got two questions in one. Thanks, Niall. Really interesting stuff. So, about 6 years ago, I published an article pretty much on this, called Endless Analog, and I theorised around technological iconicity. So, I was just wondering, I had a few ideas as to why certain hardware processors become iconic in the kind of pantheon of recording technology. But there are a whole range of others that don't. So, why do you think that is, first of all? Why do you think that, there are some hardware processors that sort of rise above all the others?
This is exactly what I was trying to get at, if you like. I think all of these factors have part to play. The reliability thing is something that I was a little bit surprised to see as being so significant, because it's not something that you initially think of. Like, say, it's not cool, it's not sexy, it's not doing anything for the same. But as a working professional, obviously that's something that you need. If you want to get that colour and you turn to your boss to add that thing at this moment in the session and it doesn't work, your magic ingredient is gone, and then it's repaired it as well. So that was something that it's not talked about a lot, but seems to be super significant. And in the case of a lot of these very vintage devices, so you're saying you have 70s LA2A, it's still going, right? So how many other things have you bought? But how many other things have you bought in the 70s that still actually work? So I think that sort of long tail effect actually is part of it as well. This thing is still in daily use rather than a thing that was really cool at the time but broke, and now it's not getting used on records.
And that's also linking back into what you were talking about with build quality, is that some will last, we've got a Portec EQP1A in our studio, and it's and it was made in 1958, so to that end, there are some processes that outlast others.
Yeah, so I mean that's potentially part of it as well. It's just this thing stuck around for way longer, so it got used on more records. So so the catch-22 kind of built up again. I don't know if we're going to see any, I don't want to diss anyone, but Behringer classics in 20 years. So knobs gaffer tape back on again.
Mm-hmm. And the second part of this is sort of an extension to that question is. To what extent is this, because I talked about the canonisation of technologies in one of my books that's also coming out shortly, and I wondered to what extent is the canonisation of technology, for example, Uriel 76, intrinsically linked to the canonisation of process, i.e. this sort of all buttons in mythology that then comes with that particular piece of outworking.
So, sorry, by the canonisation of technology, you mean sort of this reputation it gets as being having a sort of a special ingredient?
Just mentioned the third child, which is a classic example of a piece of technology that's canonised. It has a whole built-in kind of mythology, technological iconicity.
Well, it's linked with the Beatles and Abbey Road.
Exactly, that's right. Vinyl,
Well, I think that's some of that comes back to what the respondents were saying about was this used in Abbey Road or on tour with Sabbath. It's that sort of appeal because it's linked with a specific, well-known or well-regarded artist or production. So I'm not quite sure how to separate out those two things. If you wanted to look at just the factors related to the tech, that kind of wider context again seems to be important. So this is part of, I guess, the commercialization of music. We have these very famous artists, and okay, we can use the name of that artist to sell this piece of equipment as well. Maybe this links into the trend now, obviously, with plug-in manufacturers to have these sort of name-branded plugins, and like Andrew Sheps, he's using his brand to sell the software in this case, but I think what you're talking about there is using the sort of name brand to sell the hardware or to develop the reputation of the hardware. But it's it's quite an early stage in research, so that's not something I've gone into a lot of detail yet.
That's really good. Well done.
Yeah.
Really quickly, I wonder if you considered a community of people that are building their own coins of these like classic gear. So there's like an online forums that are just it's really well populated, and I wonder if that's going to feature in your research of taking the classic gear and replacing particular components to start kind of building their own hybrid versions of things, and whether that's going to play into.
Well, at the moment, I'm trying to look more at the classics rather than sort of the newer iterations of them. But they're a manifestation of this sort of the classic appeal or this classic heritage. Now, people are, as you say, building on that. But what happens if I swap out this transformer or change the capacitor values in here, and how does that affect the behaviour of it? But I think I'm more interested in sort of looking at the original devices at this point. Something I would like to do though is look at case studies in particular things. I mean, there are these names that, compressors are a big field in this. There's classic synthesizers, there's classic desks, there's classic effects units like the PCM 70. But for some reason, the classic compressor area is something that seems to have been studied a lot more and is better documented. So initially, I'm kind of looking at that. And certainly, I think that's a very interesting next step, if you like, is, what have people done with these classics to sort of bring them into the 21st century?
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.